Hey, my name's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour, and if you're wondering why I'm so chipper, it's because we're talking about preparing for death. This is the 5th video in the series, so at this point I'm like, hey, this is brass tacks. Let's just talk with each other. We've been doing this for a while, but I understand that if you're just jumping into this playlist at this point, you're probably like, are we seriously? We're not going to have like any kind of tone here of like, hey, it's okay. Because I know some of you watching are here and you're asking these questions because things are tough. Maybe you got some tough news. I'd encourage you to watch the whole playlist. But the reality is, we're to the point in the conversation where it is kind of brass tacks time. It's kind of time to deal with what I think is the hardest step in preparing for death, and that is dealing with our own stuff. So we dealt with practical external stuff a couple videos back, like just getting your affairs in order, your money, the insurance stuff, planning a funeral, that sort of thing. Very important, but it's very important so that we can get to this, so that we can just put that stuff aside and say, all right, I've thought it through, I'm good, I'm at peace with that, and get on to the more existential things. So last video, we talked about something that gets a little bit deeper, and that is the relationship side of things. That's a huge deal, and we took a bunch of time to break that down and talk about forgiveness and nurturing healthy relationships and all of that kind of stuff. Sounds hokey when I say it fast, so go watch the video if you want to. But now we get to the one that I think is just straight up the hardest, and I mentioned it a minute ago. It's figuring out stuff with ourselves. 8th grade English. I'm sitting there in the front row being the super good student, and I remember interacting with my teacher heavily during this lecture or whatever you want to call it. And she said, all right, so what movies you guys like? What kind of stories? And, we all chimed in with Star Wars or whatever was cool at the time. And she was like, yeah, cool. Those are very popular, and those are maybe the most popular kind of conflict-driven stories, because it's the individual fighting against the individual. It's usually framed as good versus evil. The evil is outside of you, the main character, or whoever you relate to. And so the main character, and you relate and view the story through their lenses, goes out and fights the evil, which is external. It's a very comfortable kind of story to watch. It's a very reaffirming kind of story to watch. And it's cheap entertainment usually. I was like, yeah. Wait, how can there be other kinds? Good guy, bad guy. She's like, all right, well, think about what we just read. We just read The Old Man and the Sea, right? And I was like, oh yeah. And literally I'm having this conversation with her. It's very memorable. And she was like, all right, so Matt, who was the bad guy in The Old Man and the Sea? The sea? She's like, yeah, think about it. It was the elements. And she said it very eloquently, but basically her point was that from the moment we're born, we start dying. I think that's a cake line. And the reality is that entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, this stuff is real. And this shell that we live in, it wears down, it breaks down, and every one of us are victims of the same thing. Every one of us are up against the same thing, and every one of us is going to lose. Father Time is undefeated. I was just like, whoa. I just never thought about that being something that could make for an interesting story, but I guess it is. And then she said, but there's another one. How can there be more? You've already opened my eyes so much, ma'am. And I think she was talking to the rest of the class here, but she went on to say that the best stories for all time, any story that's stood the test of time that you care about, the central conflict, even if it looks like it's a good guy versus a bad guy or a good guy versus an avalanche or whatever, the real central conflict is the individual versus themselves. Whoa, you're right. Think about it. And just immediately, I could see like the Plinko chips falling out of my brain as I inserted each movie or story I'd ever heard into my mental Plinko board, and it would bounce over to interesting character battling with his own problems. That's actually a really good movie. Or super flat, boring character who just punches and kicks people until they are dead, and he's right the whole time. Whoa, those are awful movies. Those are great movies. And then you give it a little more time. As an 8th grader, you haven't really screwed anything up yet, so it's kind of hard to fully understand and embrace that. But you give yourself a little bit of time, and come on. You start screwing stuff up. You start, like the word screwed up, for example. You start doing stuff that, yeah, maybe you meant to get things right, but you got things wrong. You're ham-fisted. Maybe you meant to get things wrong, and you succeeded, and you hurt some people. You're in 8th grade. You don't have any influence. You can't really affect a ton of things yet. I mean, nothing personal if you're in 8th grade. It matters. But, I mean, as you age, you have more opportunity to do good, more opportunity to do bad. And well, you start to use some of that influence for things that maybe don't work out the best, maybe weren't intended the best. And then you realize somewhere maybe in your 20s, like, dang, I planned on growing up to be perfect and I'm not. I hurt people. I did dumb stuff. I got red on my ledger, not like I haven't killed anybody, but metaphorically, I got red on my ledger. And that's where I think we start to lean in to one of those three conflict stories. I don't think most of us go through life with the I'm the hero and they're the villain. I know some people like that. I like some people like that. But generally speaking, that kind of person is from the very loud end of the distribution of the bell curve of personality types. They're the ones who are always sure they're right and everyone else is wrong and everything's a crusade. And eventually healthy people sort of just steer a little bit clear because that's not reality and it's not true and it's frustrating to be around. Then there are the people who like to go out in the wilds. I'm a big fan of that and feel like I am in this courageous fight against entropy. And that's interesting, kind of rugged and individualistic. And, folks like that can be pretty cool and pretty interesting too. But let's be honest, the people who are fascinating, the people who I think live well, the people who make you think, the people who I think overwhelmingly we admire are the people who are in some way aware that they're their own biggest problem, that they're flawed, that they have the capacity for beautiful things, they have the capacity for broken things, and they find some kind of way to reconcile that and move forward. Some in an apparently sort of a religious way, and others, and then this is the version that makes a lot of sense to me, in a theistic way, leaning into some kind of hope or grace or forgiveness from God to sort those things through. We'll talk about more of that stuff in the next video. And so as we embrace the fact that we've got this narrative, this story, and we're a player in this story, and that it's a good play, it's an interesting play, and the play has a very complicated protagonist with ups and downs and weird stuff and mixed bag, well, that can become kind of addictive. That can become the story of our whole lives, right? I wrestle against myself, and it's kind of noble, and I make some progress, and I make some mistakes. But here's a question for you. When does that end? What is the end game? What do you do? See, I would posit that I think it's possible to kind of get addicted to the wrestling and forget that the reason we wrestle is to actually grow, to learn, to actually maybe beat back some of those darker impulses and replace them with things that are more long view, more gracious, more considerate of others, more noble, more ethical, more moral, more God-shaped. Again, if you're coming at it from the perspective I aspire to come at it from. So at some point, there's got to be some practical stuff before the clock runs out that we just try to do, to make some changes on, to make some decisions on, to say, I'm going to do this. And so here are a few of those that much smarter people than me have demonstrated to me, have spoken into my life that I thought might be useful, that I figured I'd share with you. One, the forgiveness thing is huge. We talked about it relationally last time around, but also leaning into the forgiveness of God. If you are a theist in any way, accepting the reality that if there's a maker behind all of this, and that maker is perfect, and I clearly am not, then any relationship that could exist between me and such a maker on good standing would be a gesture of grace on the part of the maker, and there's no other mechanism by which such a relationship could happen. Well, if that's the case, forgiveness isn't just a thing that religious documents teach. It's hardwired into reality and the laws of nature. If there's a God, and you can be right with God, forgiveness on the part of that God must happen. It's hard to lean into that. We like to beat ourselves up. We like to lean into our failures. Our scars make us, right? That only goes so far. And eventually you get out of the Linkin Park stage, and eventually you get to a place where you're like, no, there's healing, and there's healing and forgiveness and hope. And leaning into that is something that's a really good idea to do sooner or later, whether you're in the immediate stage of preparing for death or the very long-term stage of preparing for death. Again, not my idea. Smarter people than me. I'm repeating their stuff. Don't be mad. I think anger is part of the deal as well. That can become part of the narrative, is that I've got this angst and this frustration with things that didn't work, or wish I'd made that choice, or that this thing had happened, or that those people hadn't wronged me. And you've seen it. I mean, you know the difference between that 90-year-old dude who you know from around town or church or wherever, who is just completely at peace with things, and they're just kind and grandfatherly, and it feels like They are really cool with how life worked out. And then you look at how life worked out and you're like, it's nothing particularly remarkable. Like, it seems like you did some stuff and some things like normal people, except you're just at peace. And then you look at the guy's neighbor who's also 90, and they call the cops on you if like you play ladder golf in the front yard with your kids and the knocking of the little balls is too dang loud and the clicking sound hurts their ears, and like they're bitter and angry and resentful about everything and they despise other people for their youth. Like, don't be that guy. Here's how you get to be that guy. Be mad about everything forever. Be super mad about how much better the world used to be than it is now. Be mad about how much better the commercials were and the toys were and the politics were and the environment and everything was before. One of the things that you can do to get ready for death is just drop all of that and be like, before had beautiful things and had complicated things, and I accept that. Now has beautiful things and has complicated things. As a Christian, one of the things that I think can be really helpful there is the theological reality that everything's broken and all of it's in need of grace, but all of it also bears little marks of the Creator that's behind it. So it's bittersweet, it's beautiful and transcendent, and also incomplete and broken and in need of redemption. And my little moment when I grew up and their little moment when they grew up and right now, well, it's all both of those things. But yearning for something and being angry about that no longer being the thing, being angry at people who hurt you, angry at choices, things like that, you're the one who has the keys for yourself. And at some point, the people who I see really nail this just make a decision to be like, nah, I'm just not going to be owned by that anymore. I'm not going to do the mad thing anymore. I heard one guy in so many words who was late in life and I was picking his brain say, like some kind of just cosmic argument. He was like a physicist guy. He's like, yeah, I think about the quadrillions of particles that float around in all of existence. You know, this infinite universe or expanding almost infinite universe. And then you think about what the odds are that those particles that happen to make up me would be such a permutation that it would be a sentient being, let alone this sentient being, let alone this sentient being in this moment in time where things are really relatively easy with the people who are around me. It's just crazy. I shouldn't exist. Nothing should exist. Love shouldn't exist. I never should have known an ounce of happiness. I should have been a zillion particles of space dust scattered to all ends of the universe. Instead, I'm here. What are the odds? Like at some point, I think Ben Folds came to the same conclusion in one of his songs when he said, like, the universe is like all of this stuff, so you don't have to be a chump. And that's basically what this old dude was saying. And he's right. At some point, whether you believe that this is total happenstance or whether you believe as I do that there's a God behind it, a little gratitude is a beautiful balm for a hurting soul, for a challenged narrative of the individual versus themselves as you're trying to get ready for death. All right, I got other stuff. Okay, so we got forgiveness. We got the don't be angry thing. Celebrate the fact that you're alive and you get to do stuff. We got the seek forgiveness. We talked about that last time around. Accept your decisions. That's something I've seen really smart people do in preparation for death, and I want to imitate that because it seems to work for them. It is so easy for me to look back at some of the things that I picked. They weren't moral choices. They were just, do I do this or do I do that? And to look at a few of them and be like, I totally botched that. I mean, think about all the doors that could have opened, the things that could have happened, the fun I could have had if I'd done this other thing. Why did I pick that thing? And eventually you start to realize that all of your choices are a bit deterministic. You can blow that up and make changes, but you can't blow up the reality of that time and where you were and what you did. And that can be a source of resentment and something that really gets in the way of being prepared for death. Healthiest people I've seen deal with this, accept it. No regrets. They just move on and they get it. And they're like, I picked that thing. And who knows how life would have worked out if I picked this other thing. It might be fun to game it out with a buddy, over drinks, sitting around a campfire sometime and to think through, what if I'd done this instead of that? But the reality is, I'm here. I did this. All of these weird twists and turns are what got me here to this place, and okie dokie. And as maybe simplistic as that sounds, I again think it is balm for the soul to accept that we live on a linear timeline. We're bound by it. You only get each moment as you are in each moment. And all you have is the set of memories that you have. Of course, there's going to be wreckage in there that you don't like, but we've already talked about how to put that back together as best as we can. Beyond that, we depend on the forgiveness of God. And we try to get to a place where we accept how it went down and how the whole thing played out. Here's another thing that I've seen really healthy people do in response to the specter of death, and that is grieve. It's sad that you're going to die. I know a lot of people who are watching this video. There's a good chance that I'm thinking of you and have thought of you in preparing this video. I think about the fact that you're going to die. I don't just sit around and worry about my own death. I do think about that too. I'm sad that you're going to die. It's sad that our bodies are aging. It's sad that we can't exist in a state of unbroken, perpetual youth in perfect harmony with nature, where nobody's trying to kill anybody else, nature's not trying to kill us, and we're not trying to wreck ourselves. It is almost like the entire story of the Bible starts with just such an environment before it breaks. Maybe there really is this built-in human yearning for such a state of existence, and maybe there's something very symmetrical. It's like poetry, it rhymes, about the way the story of redemption laid out in the Bible works. That we start in this state, that we experience the fullness of human brokenness, of us working against each other, nature working against us working against ourselves, and then in addition, we are held out the promise to us of what it's like to be in a state where it's not like that anymore, where it's fixed and it's redeemed and it's restored. The whole story comes with both optimism, which we've talked about, but it also comes with a degree of grief that you are only here for a little while. As we perceive of things right now is sad. The people you love will miss you deeply is sad, not trite sad. I sounded trite last time when I said that last sentence. Let me say it again. It's sad. It's honestly sad. And it's okay to grieve the reality that you're mortal and that the people you love are mortal. And frankly, that the people who irritate you but that you still respect are mortal. It is the bittersweetness of life. I also, as a Christian, believe it points us towards something that is much more true and much more real, and that is sitting there for the taking because of the work of God. Again, more on that in the next conversation. So we got the gratitude, we got the forgiveness, we got the resisting the temptation to be angry, we have the acceptance of decisions. I think something else that is maybe a little bit practical, but that seems to be effective for the people I see do this well, is that they do all the stuff they can do. Not like, that's bucket list, I'm going skydiving, and then I'll be ready to, whatever, you just got to do whatever you want. Now, what I'm talking about is I think I've moved all the chess pieces the way I needed to move the chess pieces. The practical stuff, the relational stuff, the stuff that just honestly, I didn't want to lose to myself over in this life. The stuff that I needed to look in the eye and face down and deal with and think through and own my crap and embrace forgiveness where I need to, move forward where I need to, but all of it, the existential stuff, the practical stuff, you do those things. And I think there is a right state that can come out of all of that. And I guess that's what this whole video is about. And I guess this video, of all the ones that I've made, is probably the most for me of any of them. I hope you're finding it helpful. I mean, all of these are longer than the 8 minutes I set out to make them, but I mean, you're seeing we're not cutting anything. I wanted these all to feel like an honest conversation between people who care about each other and care about the fact that we're both mortal, instead of a snappy YouTube video. So if you're still here, thanks for being here. I hope that all of this is stuff that points us toward that place of peace. The Bible calls it a peace that passes understanding, when all of this stuff is happening in the context of a God who is bigger than life and death. Again, we're going to talk about more of that next time around. There's questions that come at the end of that you might be like, well, I want to do all these things. I want to be ready for death. I want to live with peace with, my past and where I'm at with things. But, how does this all fit together? What does it mean? And it's easy to feel like there's no rhyme or reason to it. And that can be a source of frustration. And then this is a verse, and if you've been around Christianity, you've heard it before and you probably know where I'm going, but Isaiah 55 speaks to this and acknowledges that there's a mind, there's an entity who does see the whole tapestry of our lives, all the threads, all the maneuvers, all of the patterned decisions that were made. They see it for what it is and they get it. And they see for all the blemishes and yuck. And yet this entity, seeing all of the good and the bad and the weird, still loves the tapestry, still loves the individual. But his ways are held out as being much higher than ours. For my thoughts, speaking of God, are not your thoughts. Neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Usually, those verses go with funerals to be like, oh, we don't know why Ted died, but we really miss him. And that's fine. You can quote it that way. It works great. Cool. It's your funeral. You do whatever you want. It's your funeral. I didn't mean to say that. But I think there's something more encouraging going on there, and that is the fate. Well, fate isn't a thing. Fate is wrapped up in some larger thing that's going on with an entity that actually has the processing power to take in all the data, to see and not be surprised by any of the data, and to manage this whole thing. I find tremendous reassurance in that. And that belief, which I'm not going to get into in this video, but which I think is rooted in reason and evidence. I know some of you see that different. We can get along and respect each other just fine. But I think that belief is really helpful in achieving these things that we've been talking about practically to process through in preparation for death. Bottom line is this: man versus self, woman versus self, the individual dealing with their own narrative and their own story is enormously challenging. I get that, but I think we often get fooled into believing that there is no end game for that, that the wrestle is the game. And I have seen people defy that, and I find those people to be the best prepared not only for death, but the best prepared for life while they have it. And I'm trying to imitate it. And it's obviously imperfect, but I'm trying to imitate it. Next time around, we're going to talk about the last thing. Talked about getting your affairs in order. We talked about getting your relationships in order. We're now talking about getting our self in order. The last thing in terms of preparing for death is the big question: getting stuff in order with God, or lack thereof, if you choose to come at it that way. But I'm unapologetically going to make the case for no, square things up with God. Let's think about this afresh. You do not have to think all the same things I think or land on all the things, vote the way I vote. I don't care about any of that stuff. But I want to hold this out and run this simulation together, because if we don't consider this as the ultimate question, then I think we have not been thorough in preparing for death. So that's what's up next. I have no idea how long this went, but I really appreciate you hanging out with me. And I appreciate those of you who are willing to dive into a very difficult, very strange topic. I hope it's beneficial. It's been a huge help for me. So thanks for being here to push me to think about hard things for myself. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. Let's do this again soon.